Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's session of People of Interest. We are deeply honored to be hosting Dr. Sandy Greenberg. Many of you already know about him through the bio that we've included in our flyer, and it's a very exhaustive and comprehensive and varied bio with an incredible list of diverse achievements and successes. And we're going to unpack some of those as we move through tonight's conversation with Dr. Greenberg. I just want to open by thanking him profusely and profoundly for taking the time to be with us tonight, despite a hectic schedule and a very ambitious worldview and aspiration to literally change our world for the better through the various initiatives Sandy, as he asked me to call him, has initiated. So, Dr. Greenberg, Sandy, let me begin by asking you the following. You've led a life of exceptional achievement, but you had modest roots. Can you describe your childhood in Buffalo, perhaps, for a few minutes for us to understand and get to know you a bit?
Sure. First, let me say thank you for the invitation. It's my honor to be here with you and the people who are listening. I was born in a benighted area, Buffalo. We lived in a flimsy wooden house, but the foundation consisted of strong, sturdy human beings who shaped my life. My father, Albert, escaped from the Nazis in 1939, penniless. One of the great joys I had with him was that he would sit me down and suspend a stick of gum over my head. And as he dropped it, he told me it was coming from heaven. But those moments of joy vanished all too soon because he died when I was 5, and his death devastated me. He left my mother, Sarah, with $54 and 3 children under 5 to raise. My mother went to a social service agency to seek assistance. They were happy to do so, they said. However, my mother would have to put her 3 children in 3 separate orphanages. My mother would have none of it. She was a reserved and quiet person, deliberate, thoughtful, and as the Israelis say, a sabra, tough on the outside, sweet on the inside. But she had the skin for grimness, which unfortunately followed her throughout her life. Several years later, she married Carl, who was a junk dealer. One day, a disgruntled employee hurled a brick at him, catching him in the eye. And of course, it required a prosthetic. Carl was stronger than I was, in many ways, more powerful. While I have overcome, he endured, which is the much, much greater feat. Carl was made of iron because he had to be. My grandmother, Pauline, was born in Poland, and at age 8, a broken spring from a cradle burst into her eye, requiring, just as was true of my father Carl, a prosthetic, an obscene irony in retrospect. It was almost too much to be with my grandmother, as though you weren't worthy of it. She had taken a trip from a nowhere place to London, where she operated a candy store and where she had a number of siblings. After a while, she took a voyage across a cruel ocean. She wound up in Philadelphia and then ultimately Buffalo, New York. When you hugged her, you felt anointed and you left more powerful, stronger. Her death took something sacred from me, but also left behind something sacred too. I hope that's helpful.
Wow. So you come from a long line, as it were, of survivors, of individuals who overcame, and as you put it so eloquently, endured. Um, I'd like to move on to another question, which is, what was it like for a poor Jewish kid from Buffalo to attend Columbia University on a scholarship? I mean, that's quite a transition.
In a word, it was a blessing. When I walked through the massive gates of Columbia on Broadway and 116, I knew I was going to be initiated into the secret treasures of knowledge from across the continents and the millennia. I did not know how impactful the friends that I met would be in the course of my life, but there were many. And as to the faculty, their infectious passion stayed with me to this day, their passion to learn and to teach.
That's really beautiful. Now, as I've read in some of the articles in researching our talk for today, you obviously during college years suffered blindness, and I wanted to ask if you can share a little bit about what that was like, going from being able to see to, in a short period of time, not being able to see. Are you able to describe for us the trauma of waking up from surgery blind after 19 years of sight? What was that like? How did you feel? How did you process that?
I've never really truly figured out how to state that in a way that was clear. I will tell you this, that I was in the Detroit hospital bed, and after surgery, where the doctor told me that I would be blind the next day, my mother was sitting at the front of my bed. When I was wheeled in to the room, she saw her eldest son blinded, his eyes cut open. That was what it was like, that level of pain, which is truly indescribable. I've read recently, after I published the book, although it's a more universal statement, from Samuel Barber, who described what I felt like in these words: sore was the suffering borne by the body of Mary's, sore still to him, which for his sake was grief that came down upon his mother.
Hmm. So, Sandy, can I ask you, how did you process that internally, emotionally, psychologically? Did it take you a long period of time? What were some of the Who were some of the people, or what were some of the ideas that were able to get you through that time, and moreover, to help you embrace your life, your new reality, with vigor, with optimism, and with strength of character that all together, converged to make you the person you are today?
Well, one of the life-sustaining features of that period of time for me was a promise I made to God that I would do everything for the rest of my life to make sure no one should go blind. However, that does not mitigate against the horror of returning home to my hometown of Buffalo, New York, where I lie in bed despondent and fully aware that I had no future. I was a dropout from Columbia. I had no money. I had no eyes. And as far as everyone could see, I had no future. However, there was my girlfriend, Sue, who I was convinced would leave me, but she did not. And she became the center of gravity of my life. She is still with me.
Wow. Wow, that's an incredible story of loyalty, of friendship, of companionship, and of love.
Love.
That's incredible. Did you, you know, maybe this is a little bit too personal, but did you ever ask her how her experience was? What, you know, that was a transition, obviously a huge, impossible transition for you to make. But we can imagine that for her too, there was a great transition to make. And what was her experience like?
I would have to say that, in a word, it was the fact I came to know that she loved me,
Mm.
and loved me with an intensity that I could not believe. At first, I doubted her, but as each day went on, each difficult day, she was always there by my side. She tried to lift up my spirits, but that didn't help because no one could. The night I came home from the hospital, I was in my bedroom with my brother Joel, who was in the bed next to me. And for the first and only time, I cried about my situation. It was that night. And my brother Joel, my sweet brother, put his hand on my shoulder which was a blessing that enabled me to sleep. But there were other people, my mother, certainly, my father, and then there were my roommates at Columbia, Art Garfunkel and Jerry Spire. And they both wanted to come and visit me. And I refused because I did not want them to see me in my newly deformed condition. But my friend Arthur decided to fly in anyway. And he came with a purpose, which was to persuade me to return to Columbia.
Mm.
There was no way, I told him, that I could return. Blind in Manhattan was not a pretty picture. My parents were violently opposed to my returning. They were convinced, with a rock-solid conviction, that I would be killed by a bus or falling into a manhole or some bricks falling on me.
Wow.
All of which were reasonable thoughts. And it's only now that I am a father and have been for quite some time, do I fully understand their angst and their concern. And I would probably react the same way were I to have a child in my circumstance at age 19.
So Art had to both convince you and somehow help you convince your parents,
Yes.
allow you to return to Columbia. Can I ask, how did he get through to you in that time? You ostensibly, correct me if I'm wrong, your reservation was not only physical, about your physical safety. It may have been to do with the social context and also the academic process. How did he manage to get through to you?
I had no concern about my physical ability to live in New York. That was hardly the biggest issue. To me, it was a function of my soul, my heart. Who was I?
Mm.
Was I going to be consigned to a life of making screwdrivers or caning chairs in a sheltered workshop, as they all implored me to do, that is to say, the social workers?
Wow.
Or was I going to pursue the path I had in mind, which was to graduate from Columbia, go to Harvard Law School, and then secretly I hoped to go into politics,
Mm.
perhaps even the governorship. But Arthur walked down my street, Saranac Avenue in Buffalo, and he first tried to persuade me that it was important, very important for me to come back to school. And my response was in the negative. There was no possibility, I told him, that I could do it given my situation. And he persisted for a little while and then saw that there was no possibility of persuading me. So we sang together and strolled down the street as though we were back at Columbia, savoring our good fortune. But then he stopped and said, "Let me try and make this clear to you, Sanford. Before we became roommates, you and I made a pact which said that if either of us was in crisis, the other would turn to aid him." And he said, "Sanford, that's the situation we're in right now. I think that you don't understand the situation right now. I do think it's important for you to return, but that's the decision you have to make. But think about me. We had this agreement, didn't we? You're my best friend, aren't you? I need you there."
Wow. So many things come to mind in that poignant and powerful and very visual depiction of a journey of friendship. The biblical example of David and Jonathan.
Very
That
much.
type of, that type of friendship is so unique. At least I'm thinking in modern term, modern context, where there's been so many studies of teenagers saying that they feel lonely and they don't have real friends, even if they have many social media friends. And they actually have said when they were polled, they said they do not feel like they can count on many people in their life. And I think your life, just the past few minutes of your description of your life, paints a very different and unique picture of individuals that you were surrounded by that were the complete opposite. They were people who were there for you thick and thin, from Sue to Arthur to your mother and father. That's the first thing that comes to mind. What a gift and blessing you benefit from, the gift and benefit of friendship, and contribute to, obviously, it goes without saying. Another fascinating insight is that Arthur, it seems, recognized that the only way he could convince you to join him was to talk to your sense of friendship, to your kindness, to your compassion, to your sense of being there for others, your other-centeredness, your ability and willingness to be there for others. And that was actually, on the one hand, very, very wise, but also obviously a testament to the person you are. And it's in that knowledge that Art knew he would get through to you. And when he said that, was that the final argument, as it were?
I naturally had mixed feelings as we were walking, because he had brought back some of the excitement from college with him. But I have to say that due support, and then with Arthur's putting it the way he did concerning our solemn covenant,
Mm.
I felt I had to fulfill it.
Mm.
That's what turned me around.
Wow. Now, I'm sure that decision was hard to execute. The meaning to say, in reality, while that's a powerful moment, an epiphany or a crystallization of friendship, what was it like to get back to campus? I mean, the way you described it, I mean, we were talking about quite a lot of time ago. I think maybe the reality has changed today for individuals who are partially blind or blinded. And today the opportunities are much more perhaps available. There's more integration, there's more awareness, and there's more inclusion. But from the way you described it, the people of authority in your life at the time had really essentially resigned you to a particular, I don't want to use the word fate, but something along those lines. And the expectation for Sandy Greenberg had shrunk almost instantaneously. And there you are, charting a new path, really. I wonder about the statistics. Were you the only individual who was blind in Columbia at the time, or was that unique? Was that challenging? Was the school capable of handling that? How did they welcome you back? And how was art there for you in the day-to-day in the next period when you rejoined Columbia?
I was so thrilled to return to college, in addition to being petrified about my future coursework, that I didn't think about what the administration was saying or thinking. What I focused on was my learning from some of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. And in my book, I list many of them. But Arthur was always there. He had committed on our walk that if I did return, he would do everything he could to help me. And true to his word, he did. He walked me to class, took me around the city, bandaged my shins when I bloodied them, fixed my tape recorder, and most important, although I'm reconsidering that right now as I'm speaking to you, I would always think that his reading to me regularly was the most important thing. But I think now, as we're talking, that may not have been the case. He would come into me and say, Sanford, darkness is going to read to you today. Or, Sanford, darkness is going to read the Iliad. And I suppose he meant that for him. For me, his voice was emerging from the darkness. And Hello Darkness is titled that because of my friendship with Arthur. But now, as we're sitting here talking, what was most important was not seen. What was most important to me is that from his perspective, nothing changed in our relationship. When I returned, he had put all of the accoutrements in the places they belonged. And he trusted in me. He had confidence in me. No words spoken about this. It was in the air.
So he read much of the syllabus together with you and you studied together in that way? That must have been a lot of time spent together.
Well, to be fair, there were many other readers
Mm.
who read to me, friends of mine and some friends of Arthur's. And the combination was very helpful. But always, if a reader didn't show up or was late, Arthur would fill in.
Mm.
How he did this while being an architecture student, I don't really know. In the end, there's really no way of explaining the why or even the to what extent
Mm-hmm.
of Arthur's friendship and help. The fact is that I'm indebted to him, a debt that cannot be paid. What he did for me stood and still stands as something outside of scale or measure.
Wow, wow. And from the sound of it, and this to me is absolutely heartwarming and uplifting. His faith in you, in a way, inspired your faith in yourself and in the confidence it would take and the courage to go back into that world and excel beyond anyone's wildest expectations. You know, the former chief rabbi of the UK and Commonwealth, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, tells of a moment he had with my mentor and teacher, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of righteous memory. And I won't go into the detail, but suffice it to say, there was a moment in the conversation where instead of responding to Jonathan's questions, the Rebbe asked one of his own. And Rabbi Sachs says, you know, the most transformative moments in life are the times when someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself. And it sounds to me like Arthur was one such individual that activated the zest and the passion, renewed the passion for the academy and the intellectual and academic pursuits. You know, you mentioned that you both sang together. Could you tell me a little bit about your singing friendship or relationship? Did any of that take place in a Jewish setting?
That was a very perceptive question because every night after we finished our homework, Arthur would take out his guitar and I would take out my drums, which I had brought to school. I was originally a trumpet player, but couldn't bring that to school. It would not work for the entire dormitory. So we sang together, largely rock and roll, and I was the DJ. And we recorded this, the recordings of which I gave him many decades later on a very big birthday for him.
Wow.
But more important, he and I davened together at the window of our dormitory room.
Really?
And if you heard this young man pray, he is the sweetest singer of the universe. I have those tapes here at home.
Wow.
And I listen to them for inspiration.
Would you sing and pray together each morning or regularly?
Yes. Well, we didn't always do it during the week, but we did on the weekends.
Wow. What were some of your favorite tunes, some of your favorite prayers to sing together?
When the saints go marching in, one of our, are you talking about Hebrew prayers?
Yeah, or both, but yeah, whatever you say.
Well, we didn't sing this regularly, but the Kol Nidre.
Wow.
It's my favorite piece of liturgy. We sang that together, and we cried a lot while we prayed.
So you, obviously, you're describing a very real and authentic type of spiritual connection and friendship as well. And you know, it brings me to to a question that, again, please, if it's too personal, feel free to we'll move to the next. But you mentioned something really powerful, that while you were lying in that hospital bed in Detroit, you promised God that you would do everything in your ability to ensure that no one ever suffered what you did. It seems to me that from the outset and throughout, your faith wasn't shaken. To the contrary, you took this as in a way a springboard for a mission, a way in which to take your pain and transform it into purpose, your tragedy, and turn it into some form of triumph for humanity. How did you deal with your relationship to God in this situation? Where how could you have overcome, I guess, the natural inclination that many would have to become bitter and angry and ask, why me? And then maybe go through a period of rebellion or disconnect. How did you do what you did? And if you're comfortable sharing with us your inner thought process, I would be deeply moved to hear.
First, I'll address the anger. Needless to say, I was quite angry at the outset. As time went on, I realized how futile that was, and was inspired by something that Harry Truman said: I have no time for bitterness. The way I looked at it, if I spent my time being angry, I had that much less time to devote to my mission. As to my faith, it has always remained there, but for my bar mitzvah, my speech was about Moses Maimonides, Rambam. And I became fascinated by his writings over the decades. And then when I finally got to read Principles of Faith, I had to disagree with him, because I cannot say that I believe in an unwavering way. I have struggled with that question throughout my whole life. But during my struggles, I would always come back and recognize the fundamental feeling and belief in God.
Wow, that's you know, there was a musicologist from Columbia University named I think Carl Cowan. I may be mistaken, but with the name, but he came to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a private audience, and he opened with a disclaimer. He said, I just want to make clear to you that I might be here under false pretenses. I am not somebody who is secure in my faith. I struggle with faith. So the Rebbe asked him, did you say that you struggle with faith? He said, yes. The Rebbe said, that's what it means to be a believer. It means to wrestle. It means to grow. It means at times you feel closer and at times you feel more distant, but that's part of the journey of faith. Faith isn't fixed, it's fluid. It's not static, but dynamic, right? It's not a noun, it's a verb. And I actually think that is beautifully encompassed in the Hebrew word emunah, which literally translated does not mean faith. It means a craftsman or an artisan. And our sages tell us that that's because faith is like a craft, which is practiced, and it improves and it betters over time. And, you know, I always note that in other traditions, we talk about, you know, a good Christian or a good Muslim, but in the Jewish tradition, we talk about a practicing Jew. And I think that the use of the term practicing is not arbitrary or coincidental, but it reflects the journey of faith, which is not always one-dimensional. You mentioned before.
By the way, that was very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that.
It was very, very meaningful to me.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you met some incredible teachers and role models at Columbia. Do you care to share maybe a few names and examples and what you took from them along your life journey?
The first that comes to mind was Richard Neustadt, who was professor of government. And one day he and I met on campus, and he said, "Sandy, I have a great idea for you." He said, "I know you're very interested in Senator Kennedy, but would you consider talking at universities about the senator?" Which was such an exciting opportunity that, of course, I accepted it. And it was a time also when I was losing my vision. But I kept going to these universities, and traveling there was difficult. But once I got up to speak, and I had a great deal of enthusiasm, the crowd roared their affirmation.
Yeah.
Another professor of mine named Margaret Mead, who was a great anthropologist. I took her course and understood far more after her course about cultural variations. I served also as her research assistant, and it was a privilege to understand her Weltanschauung, which impacted me powerfully. There was another professor named Richard Hofstadter, who I once asked, "What does it take to become president of the United States?" And for a moment or two, he was silent. And then he said, "Put yourself in the stream of history." I never fully understood that, but in some way I did.
Wow.
Another,
Sorry?
another professor was a man named C. Wright Mills.
Mm.
He was a great sociologist, even though he was moving to the left further than many of my friends. And one day, Fidel Castro had come to campus, and he took me by the arm and rushed me down the stairs and burst through the crowd and introduced me to Castro.
Hmm.
It was just stunning. Anyway, those are some of the names.
Wow. Along the way, I understand you've also had some very formidable mentors and colleagues, including David Rockefeller and Jerry Speyer from Tishman and Speyer, Bill Hewlett of Hewlett-Packard, and Tom Watson, who founded IBM. Can I ask you, what lessons did you learn from them? And perhaps, is there a common denominator?
That's a very, very good question. I would say that David Rockefeller said it best when he was sharing with me his philosophy of philanthropy. And the first thing he said is, "Lead with your heart, and all good things will follow."
Mm.
And I think that in its broadest sense talked about lead with your instinct. You know what is right and good and decent. Follow that path. In the case of Bill Hewlett, he was very big on research and development. He taught me the importance of research and development. Tom Watson, similarly, was discussing research and development. That was a common theme between the two of them. David Rockefeller was open to helping a lot of people, and in particular, a couple of my friends. My other college roommate, as I mentioned, was Jerry Spire. And I had introduced them because at that time, Jerry and I were on the board of a company called Tishman Realty and Construction Company, Inc. And at the time, we were building the World Trade Center.
Wow.
That was about the time we got together with David. Summarizing a lot of time, Rockefeller bought our construction division that was building the World Trade Center. That was the beginning of a relationship that Jerry had with David for decades as well. And then finally, I suppose, well, actually, he was also helpful to a couple of my other friends, one of whom was named Abe Poland. He was a Washington businessman, and he needed some financial support. And three of us talked, and I had urged David to finance the Capitol Center, a very large sports arena in the Washington area, which he did. And when I sought to purchase the Cleveland Coliseum, he also helped make that possible. But finally, what he taught me about philanthropy, in addition to leading with your heart, he said, if you are interested or passionate about the sciences and the humanities, then, as I was and am, and he surely was, then pursue both paths, because they are both important to the progress of civilization. And then finally he said, look for talented young people around the country, and then provide them with some finance anonymously. And that's what he stressed, anonymously. So, in a word, I came away from those four people enriched beyond measure.
Wow. You know, you mentioned philanthropy, and I was wondering what drives your passion and whether you can share with us a little bit about your incredible campaign and your $3 million prize to end blindness by 2020, and where that's holding. And maybe you can share with us a few words about the innovation and where things stand today.
Be happy to. As you know, and as I've discussed, the promise I made to God when I was lying in that despairing hospital bed has lived with me all these years, and I pursued it each decade. But what I discovered is that science wasn't really ready to tackle something as large as ending blindness. However, at the beginning of this century, science had made such staggering progress that while it is absurd, the idea is, Einstein said, if the idea is not absurd, it's not worth pursuing.
Ah, that's beautiful.
And I knew that what I was talking about would be viewed by many people as being totally unrealistic. Now, I could have said, let's end glaucoma, or end retinitis pigmentosa, or end macular degeneration, but those would not grab anybody's attention. But if you said, after 6 million years, we humans and our bipedal ancestors has suffered this scourge. We now are at a point as a civilization to end blindness. That would catch people's attention, which it did in a very, very major way. And Sue and I decided on October 18th, 2012, I selected 18 for a reason, and we announced this prize of $3 million to be awarded to the person or persons who does most to end blindness across the globe for everyone and forevermore.
Wow. What does the past 18 years look like? And can I ask if there's an actual winner? And if so, who they are and what they've done?
The winners will be announced on December 14th of this year. There will be an award ceremony. It was originally scheduled to be held in the Supreme Court under the auspices of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but COVID has now changed our calculation.
And are you able to share a little bit about some of the work that the winners have done without going into their names, obviously, or some of the progress? If you can paint a picture of the past 18 years of progress in a few sentences for the layman.
Well, I'm a layman too. I am not a scientist. In any event, there is a group of scientists at a university which shall not be named who have developed a method to end blindness among certain young people. There is a disease called Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is, as I like to say, a tributary of retinitis pigmentosa. And a couple of years ago, the FDA approved for the first time the ability to inject gene therapeutic drugs into the human body. Never had been done before. And to be precise and give you a concrete example, this inherited genetic disease that these young people have occurs because of a defective gene called RPE65. So what these scientists have done is they've taken and created in their laboratory a healthy gene called RPE65 to replace the defective one. And when it's injected into these young people's eyes, within a few days, they're no longer blind.
Wow. Can I ask how many people are affected, or young people specifically are affected by this illness, I guess, around the world on a yearly basis, or are there statistics?
A very good question. I don't have them at the tip of my fingers. Many, many thousands.
Wow.
But you see, more significant is the fact that this, in a way, and I say only in a way because others would certainly have some reason to disagree, it was a beginning step to utilizing gene therapy for other diseases that affect the rest of the body. That is the excitement.
So it's the first, or arguably the first instance of using gene therapy to eradicate a particular illness?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Yeah. And wow.
This is a perfect example of what I call ending blindness.
Huh. Meaning starting a process that will bring about the ending of blindness over time. What was so you think it had to, I guess my question is, why is this the first instance or area where gene therapy is being used? What took so much time, and what about maybe the prize or the attention you brought to this issue jump-started this particular new trend?
I certainly can take no credit whatsoever for the work these scientists have done. In 2012, I did state on our website that the prize is an appeal to the most brilliant minds of this generation.
Hmm. Wow.
And there was a response.
That's extraordinary. Let me ask you the following. You have an extraordinary record of public service. President Clinton appointed you to the National Science Board. You served as chairman of the Rural Healthcare Corporation. You were a director of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. You're a founding director of the American Agenda, an organization established by Presidents Carter and Ford to identify the 6 most urgent problems confronting the nation and to recommend bipartisan solutions. What do you think our most pressing problems are today? And can you recommend any solutions?
I wish I could. I'll take a stab at it. I think the most important thing, if you look at the situation that we as a civilization are located, is that we must respect each other. Without that, you're not able to address the other challenges, such as global warming or global climate change, the proliferation of nuclear weaponry, the failure of, at least in the United States, our educational system to provide a decent, healthy education for millions of our citizens. And that leads to the massive disparities in income and wealth.
Can I ask where you think the problem in the breakdown of respect came from and how you think we might address it and rectify or heal the current disintegration of mutual respect?
I think in our country, it began the day President Kennedy was shot. There is an interesting picture in the Kennedy Library where the president, as he's being inaugurated, turns to the camera and has a broad smile on his face. And that is the moment when our country was at its highest point. He had it all, just the way our country had it all. And a couple of years later, it was gone. And that brilliant moment of excellence, which we had come to after a couple of 100 years, was wiped away. And thereafter began some distrust of politics, and perhaps most important, of our institutions, which strength must be there if you're going to operate a decent democracy.
Wow, that's a fascinating observation. I wish we had the time to unpack that, as in how that momentous and unfortunate event began to unravel the seams of unity. And also you mentioned, which is quite fascinating, that in your view, one of the most, if not the most important institution where unity is essential is politics. And I think that too is very interesting. Because one might say perhaps that the solution may come from a different place, maybe from the educational system. Maybe this requires a grassroots, organic youth quake, to use the term that was coined to describe mass movement that is generated by children or youth via the vehicle of education. But as you said, the educational system itself requires some major assistance. Do you have a solution in mind, a way in which you think we can get started on rebuilding that sense of collaboration, coalition, brotherhood, peoplehood?
But it's simple. It has to start with respect.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, you can't communicate. There's just no way.
That's essentially, you just summarized really the golden rule, right? What you don't want done unto others, don't do unto yourself, which I once researched is found in hundreds of different traditions, amazingly. Although we, as a Jewish group, can claim credit to that statement, coming as it does from the greats, Rabbi Akiva and Hillel, and ultimately dating back to the verse, love your fellow like yourself. This is really and truly the foundation of a healthy and vibrant family, community, nation, and society. Let me jump ahead with one or two more questions because the hour is late and you've been so kind and generous with your time. A quick question, what do you want people who see to know about people who can't? What insight would you give us into your experience that could help us be more attuned, sensitive, and attentive to everyone in our society, including those who can't see?
That's a profound question. I suppose that you have to go back in history and realize the cultural progress that's been made in dealing with the blind in particular. You know, in the New Testament, it says, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. And blind people then were considered to be ignorant or lost or victims of their own sins, the damned. For example, Oedipus killed his father and married his mother. When his mother discovered what had happened, she hanged herself. Oedipus, in his own remorse, took 4 pins from his mother's dress and gouged his eyes out. At the same time, our culture recognized the blind at one point as being seers. Tiresias is the great example. Tiresias one day saw Athena bathing, and she struck him blind. Tiresias' mother pleaded with Athena to restore his vision. And Athena said she would not restore his vision to see the physical world, but she would give him vision to see the future. Now, to me, the blind are not the damned, victims of their own sins, ignorant, lost, nor are they seers. Seers are sighted people. The blind, they are simply blind.
So you're talking about obviously a very profound perspectival insight, which is, of course, heaven forbid, to see in someone's blindness anything iniquitous, God forbid, but also not to attribute, unique sight to in the same way. Let me ask you this. What is your advice for people facing challenges in their own lives? I mean, you have defied all odds, all expectations, above and beyond. Your achievements are above and beyond a number of very successful people put together. How did you do it? And I guess specifically, what would you tell someone who's listening about your, core principle or teaching to help one get through challenges?
I'm just one guy, and I can only speak for myself, and it's pretty personal, but to the extent I can say something that has value, I would say that we human beings ought to appreciate the bad things as well as the good things, because even the bad things are a source of remembrance, a flavor of this life. Life is very precious, as you know. Our lives, how we live them. You can't find it any place else. And once it's gone, it's gone. Therefore, the emphasis lies in the prayer that I say every morning of my life as I overlook the Potomac River. Thank you, Lord, for keeping us in life, sustaining us, and enabling us to reach this glorious moment, this glorious moment. Now, it's difficult to feel this way, but it is, in my judgment, a verity. I'll give you an example. Beethoven, at age 28, wrote a letter to his brothers, and he said, I was standing next to a man, and we were looking at a man playing the flute several yards away. I could not hear the flute. Another incident like that would end my life. But, he said, I have much in me, my art to give to the world. And so he said, and this is the key line, and so I endured this wretched existence, truly wretched. This is a man who wrote Ode to Joy. Ode to Joy. You see, we are capable, we human beings, of accepting the terrible things that happen to us, and yet, you can look at Beethoven as an example. We have, each of us, has much music to contribute to the cosmos.
Wow, that's very, very powerful. The blessing you mentioned, of course, for those who didn't pick up on it, is the most momentous of prayers, a prayer that draws attention to momentousness itself, namely the blessing of Shehecheyanu, which is for most reserved to the high holy days and major festivals. But I've learned from you, my dear new friend, Sandy, that every morning is worthy of saying the Shehecheyanu. And not only is every morning worthy of saying Shehecheyanu due to its infinite potential for good and for revealed good, obvious good, the odes to joy, as it were, but in fact, the Shehecheyanu is for the gift of life itself, regardless of how that gift manifests, of how that day evolves and unfolds. That is really and truly profound, Sandy. And thank you for sharing that. Let me conclude with one or two more questions. On the note of music, and you put it so beautifully, we each have a song inside of us to share with the universe. I want to go full circle, perhaps back to a moment where you were able to repay your dear friend Art for his kindness and to be there for him in his time of need, and to put your faith in him and put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Could you elaborate a little bit on the time that Art reached out to you and the type of career you jump-started, you invested in, perhaps we might say?
After I arrived at Harvard Graduate School, one of my professors urged me to apply for a Marshall Scholarship to study at Oxford University. And I did apply and I did receive a Marshall Scholarship. And when Sue and I first arrived at Oxford, I got a telephone call from Arthur. And he said, "Sanford, I am dropping out of architecture school." And he knew very well that I was opposed to that because I felt he would be one of the great architects of the world. I'm decided I'm going to go into the musical business with my friend Paul. And of course, that's Paul Simon. And the three of us used to meet in Forest Hills, where they both lived on weekends. And I told him that I thought that was terrific and what could I do to help? And he said, "I need $400. I knew very well that Sue and I had $404 in our checking account. This was the first opportunity I had to pay homage to our solemn covenant, and I sent him the check immediately.
Wow, without hesitation, you and Sue together put your life savings into art, into Arthur, Paul.
Yes, sir.
I gotta say, that's probably been one of the most successful investments you've
it, was,
ever made.
it was not an investment, I can assure you. It
Oh
was.
no, I meant that facetiously, of course.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Did you have any sense in the world that these guys would make it and make it that big?
Well, don't forget, I sang with Arthur for months on end every night.
Right.
And I knew, I mean, when he sang the prayers, Eli, Eli in particular, you could see where Bridge Over Troubled Waters was
Wow.
forming.
Wow.
I had the same confidence he had shown me. I reciprocated because I believed it and I knew it from personal experience.
And when things started really escalating and they started to gain fame and renown, did they change at all as human beings? Did your friendship take on a different dimension? How did art handle the fame and the renown?
One of the great things about Arthur is that he has been a consistent, a continual, and a constant friend since September of 1958.
Wow.
There's no way in which he would ignore his loyalty to his family and friends.
Wow. Now, can you tell us a little bit, maybe this, were you part of their, or did you observe their creative process, their creative musical process at all? Were you around when they wrote songs? And if so, which ones? And in particular, would you say that did they discuss with you the themes that they were writing about? What was that like, living with two very well-known musical, legends?
It was extraordinary. It was so uplifting. I remember a trip home from Oxford during the intercession. And that was a time when Paul and Arthur were recording Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. And Arthur asked me to come into the studio. He was sitting on a bench. The boom mic came right up to his mouth. And I stood there in amazement. He was singing Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme with such beauty. It was simply remarkable.
Wow. I wonder if, you know, did you observe them in their writing phase? And I guess in particular, you know, because we've talked about the song, The Sound of Silence, which is so evocative and really so powerful. I'm wondering whether you have any personal thoughts or interpretations of the song and what it means to you.
Well, as I said before, it's got a very simple message for me because to me, darkness was Arthur, a brilliant light, but he called himself darkness. So, hello, darkness, my old friend, is what I still say to him because of the days when he would read to me and out of compassion would call himself darkness. He said recently that it was a way of his joining me in the black.
Wow. He sounds like an incredibly empathetic and compassionate human being, really a special person. And you,
Character is destiny.
what?
Character is destiny.
Wow, yes. Yes, I think Margaret Thatcher said her father told her as a child, watch your thoughts for they become your words. Watch your words for they become your actions. Watch your actions for they become your habits. Watch your habits for they become your character. Watch your character for it becomes your destiny.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
you know, because I tell you, it's really beautiful to get to know sometimes the story behind the song or behind the friendship, and to get to know, you know, and your story is one of so much hope and so much and so much in faith. You know, faith in ourselves, faith in one another, and reciprocation, and how the arc of life bends forward, and in so many beautiful ways allows us the opportunity to give and take, to share and to repay. And all of that really resonates very deeply, especially in a time where, as you pointed out so poignantly, the greatest challenge we have is respecting one another, and in particular, respecting our differences. Let me ask you, have you kept up, do you keep up with art? I mean, the other day I saw a beautiful clip where Arthur was singing with his son, and it was very special. Um, I forget what song it was, but they did a duo on stage.
I keep up with him every single week without fail.
Wow.
And when we talk the same way we did back in college. I should tell you just briefly, after we became friends in our freshman year, after a humanities class, he called me over and showed me a patch of grass on Amsterdam and 118th Street near the curb. And he said, Sanford, look at how light illuminates the beauty and complexities of its colors. That little episode changed my view of nature and indeed my entire way of experiencing the world. And the theme of beauty and joy and the preciousness of time is with us in every single conversation we have.
Wow.
It never got to be corny. It was always what we believed in our hearts. And that's one of the deepest connections he and I have.
You know what's beautiful, Sandy? Your way of speaking and seeing the world is very poetic. I think at heart, you're really a poet. You know, beneath all your successes and achievements, it sounds like that was the common language between you and Arthur and Paul and maybe even to some extent your wider group of friends. And I wonder how much did Judaism or Jewish tradition or or the Jewish musicality or the Jewish prayers, how much of that played a role in Simon and Garfunkel's music, if at all? In other words, do you think their Jewishness or their being Jewish or their Jewish upbringing influenced the themes of their songs and their music in any way?
I've never discussed it with Arthur or Paul, but I can't believe that it didn't have a profound impact.
You know, I'm curious, Andy, and maybe you'll get back to me if you do have the time or you do actually have the chance to discuss it. I'm curious to know what Art would say about how Jewishness or Jewish identity or history or values or culture did influence the music. But if you ever do get around to asking him, I'll ask you to share that with me. Let me conclude, Sandy, with the final question. You wrote a fantastic and deeply moving book about everything you've described today and much, much more. Why did you write Hello Darkness, my old friend? And perhaps most importantly, what is the takeaway you'd like readers to walk away with?
Why I wrote the book stemmed originally from 2 years I had in college as a blind student, or at least going blind and then remaining blind in my junior and senior years. It was intense and very challenging. When I got to Harvard Graduate School, it was in me, for reasons which I cannot explain, to sit down and write about those previous 2 years. I had a Smith Corona typewriter. I sat down, typed 40 pages, which I subsequently put away for 40 years.
Wow.
That gave me plenty of time for introspection. And at the end of that period, and this had been gestating in me for a long time, and I realized that each of us, if we're given the gift of life, then we are obligated to account for it. I think it ought to be accounted for in writing, because that compels precision. And with that in mind, I sat down because I was now ready to write. And my book, in its own way, is a prayer to the Lord.
Wow. And what would you like readers to take away from it, if you can summarize in a word or two?
The importance of love, of your family and your friends, of your role models and your mentors, I would have to say. That tragic events don't necessarily mean tragic outcomes. That if a junk dealer's kid from Buffalo can do it, anyone can. And there's a lot of room in a large tent labeled luckiest man in the world, and the flap is always open.
Wow, that's a very poetic conclusion to a very moving conversation. And I want to take this opportunity on behalf of all gathered and those who will see this conversation going forward to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your candid, open, and very personal reflections and remarks tonight. And I can only say this: I have interviewed many people over the past decade or so. And very, very few have underwent your challenges with such incredible fortitude and optimism, and have resulted not only in personal success and achievement, but in a worldview that values making this world a brighter and more illuminated place through your writings and through your philanthropy and through your example. And so I want to conclude by once again thanking you, and please pass on our love and warmest wishes to Sue as well, and to your team and the wonderful people who gathered around you. And by extension to all of your close friends, I want to bless you all with a happy and a healthy and a sweet new year, filled with revealed good, with prosperity, with serenity, with peace of mind, with fulfillment, with joy, and with love, and with light. Sandy, you have reached across the pond to touch the hearts and souls of our community, and we are forever grateful for that. And we bless you with the strength and the energy to continue to inspire many more communities like ours and go from strength to strength.
Thank you, Rabbi, very much, and for giving me the opportunity to talk with you and whomever listens to this program.
And I just mentioned to all, the book is available at all booksellers and also, of course, on Amazon. Hello, Darkness, my old friend. And if I can just say, Sandy, in conclusion, you know, the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. One of my favorite insights into that story is that, if you'll recall, Jacob is injured by that angel in their wrestling match. And before letting the angel go, he says to the angel, I will only let you go if you bless me. And the angel then does so, and actually alludes to his future name change. No longer will you be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have wrestled with the divine and with the human, and you have prevailed. And a powerful insight into this is that, you know, Jacob's adversary was this angel who had hurt him, who had hindered his ability to walk comfortably, who had altered his equilibrium. And yet Jacob says to him, bless me. I will not let you go until you have blessed me. That is to say, and by extension, this is a lesson for us all when we encounter our personal wrestling matches with the angels that come our way, those adversaries who may seek to harm us, or those situations that seem to set us back. I will not let you go until I've managed to extract your value, extract the blessing hidden in this setback, to extract the hidden light within the darkness, to transform that setback into a springboard for growth and prosperity. And Sandy, if there's anyone I know that embodies that powerful art of transformation, it is you, and I'm deeply honored to have met you.
Similarly, I'm honored to have met you, sir.
Well, the very best. Good night, and thank you. And thank you all for attending this special gathering. Warm regards and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.